Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Today's guest, writer and activist Sam J. Miller, and in his new book, The Blade Between, he describes his hometown of Hudson in upstate New York. And that hometown is haunted by not only gentrification, but also by whale ghosts and a lot of really nasty people. A lot of kind people too, but some people do really, really nasty things. And the main protagonist is a young photographer who went to New York City, made it big, and then comes back to his hometown and encounters all this hate that he remembers from his traumatic childhood. And he is full of hate himself. We don't know if that's a stand-in for Sam. I don't know if Sam is full of hate, but let's welcome Sam J. Miller. Now, welcome to the Second Life Book Club, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And of course, the big question is, with this book that I just finished, The Blade Between, are you allowed back to your hometown of Hudson, New York?
You know, they haven't put up my picture at the border yet. And I did go home, and I was interviewed by someone who's a local blogger about this book. And I really walked into it convinced it was going to be an ambush and that they would be coming at me with really tough questions and criticisms. But it was delightful. So far, the terrible responses that I was possibly expecting or fearing have not come to pass. But that doesn't mean they're not, hard at work on a Wicker Man style fate for me.
I mean, for context, people are going like, "What are you guys talking about?" Well, The Blade Between is, like I said, it's about a town that has fallen on hard times. I did a lot of research and my team as well, and you discuss it in the book as well. This was a town that was quite wealthy based on the whaling industry, and then fell on hard times. And I don't know what the situation is now. It looks fairly gentrified. If you Google it, there are flashy magazines, and gentrification means that a lot of people are usually displaced by exploding rents. And in your book, there is a group of activists that go against it, but they go against these hipsters that are coming down from New York City with a type of brutality that is also fueled by ghosts who kind of egg on these people to and they bring out really the worst in them. One can sympathize with the cause of getting people who drive up the prices, and real estate tycoons and people who speculate on real estate to get them out of your hometown, but maybe not necessarily by murdering them with harpoons.
Well said.
That should be the blurb.
I'm a longtime anti-gentrification and displacement activist. I do support folks, being able to hold on to their communities, but I hasten to add that I do not encourage murder. One sometimes feels full of anger, but one uses fiction to explore those in a safe and non-murder kind of way.
That's really I read three of your books. I read the your first book, The Art of Starving, and then this new one, The Blade Between, and I just finished Blackfish City. And the common themes are, in fact, as exemplified by your protagonist. There's often people with tragic, traumatic childhoods, but they are fueled by hate and anger. Um, Again, which I can relate to. My co-producer Shyla, the Super Gecko, she prepared two slides here. I just want to throw them up here real quick. One slide, uh, the word hate, and then the other theme in your books, and that's why I think your books are very, very powerful. There is the theme of forgiveness. Um, Now, all these protagonists are struggling to channel their very relatable anger in a productive way, and some of them fail and some of them succeed, but you always kind of wrap it up in a really great way, in a tragic way sometimes, with the theme of forgiveness. Now, I want to ask you straight out, where are you in your own journey, from the journey of being fueled by anger to forgiveness? And then follow up question right off the bat: why is forgiveness so important? When you have people who are evil, and you gotta beat them, how can you forgive them?
I'd like to think that I'm pretty far along on my journey from anger and hate and letting that fuel me. And I think that when I was young, both in my personal life and sort of my coming of age journey, and also my life as an activist and an organizer who wanted to fight to change the problems that I see in the world, I definitely started off with a lot of anger. I wouldn't really describe hate as part of it. But just anger that things were the way they are, and that people don't want to do anything to change them. And that's, for me, that was not sustainable. That's the kind of thing that leads to people burning out. I spent 15 years as a community organizer, which is a really hard job and a really difficult work. It's difficult work to do, and I watched a lot of people burn out. And usually, those folks were the ones who couldn't turn it off, who couldn't relax, who couldn't step away and watch bad television, or read good books. So for me, I'm definitely coming from a place now where, even though there's a lot of things that I wish were different, and I do feel a certain kind of rage against them. That's not what's motivating me. That's not what's driving me. I do believe that that solutions are possible. I think that the reason that violence is not the path that I've chosen, and why I don't think that hate and rage are the most useful, is because they make it difficult to come up with a solution. When there's a problem, there's usually people benefiting from it. And those people have to be prevailed upon to see things differently. So, for example, I've been a vegetarian for 24 years.
I was going to ask you, because your first book, and that's so awesome. Sorry to jump in here, but your first book, The Art of Starving, we'll talk about it later in the hour, is about a teenager, who is anorexic and is bullied in school, and his mother works at this hog factory, basically, well, killing pigs. And as I was reading it, in the end, I was thinking in my head, oh my God, wouldn't it be, and this is a spoiler alert, wouldn't it be awesome if he becomes a vegetarian, and then boom, you do it, Sam, and it was awesome. So sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a thing that is important to me. Animal rights are important to me. But a lot of people profit from meat. There's a lot of, there's like massive systems in place to keep animals in cages and enslave them and exploit them and eat them and kill them. And lots of people enjoy eating meat. So there can't be animosity or anger between folks who want them to stop. It really has to be about folks figuring out solutions and figuring out a way forward. So for me, the reason forgiveness is a recurrent theme is just because, I don't think that necessarily one side is right and one side is wrong. I think both sides believe that they're right. No one believes that they're a bad person, to quote Tom Ripley in The Talented Mr. Ripley. And so in order for problems to be fixed, it needs to be possible for folks to talk and compromise and meet and have meetings. I hate meetings, but having meetings is important when you're trying to solve a complex problem like gentrification.
I heard an interesting interview with a labor organizer on the ground, and she was saying the exact same thing. And that's what people do say on the ground, that you have to sit at the table. I was just going to ask you. I mean, a real estate developer in Hudson or wherever, even the suburb of Munich where I grew up, these people are ruthless. They go over the dead body of grandma, when they can evict her if they want to build, whatever they want to build, a high rise or whatever. How can you sit at the table with them, though? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, and
I completely
sometimes
agree with you, but I just don't know if I personally would have it in me to sit at the table and not go completely nuts. with people who are evicting people left and right and cause enormous misery for monetary gain. And as a matter of fact, in Blackfish City, you have a great line where it says you can fight, you can win against people, but you can't win against money, which is actually uh, in the context very positive, because you gotta, like, don't worry about winning against big money, but take individual people and win against them.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? The slave owners did not decide to end slavery in the United States, right? It isn't the people who are profiting the most from a problem are not necessarily the ones who are going to change it. But if we change the conversation, if enough people believe that something is wrong, if there's political will to support it, then people in positions of power, political power, will can be prevailed upon to take action that they weren't before. I mean, you look at climate change, which for decades we've been sounding the alarm and talking about the problems of climate change, and I think in the past couple of years we've seen a real shift in the conversation. Certainly in the United States, and I think globally, where suddenly, because everyone is talking about it in a way, politicians are vocalizing and supporting solutions that they weren't before. Having those conversations, being able to shift the story, tell the story differently, I think is a huge part of organizing.
I threw up a slide here. This is Shyla prepared this slide. It's a quote. So that's sort of the fear that is at the root of this, of people being made homeless, of communities being destroyed, of money coming along and claiming something and not caring how the humans caught up in the net, in this net, feel about it. In the book, The Blade Between, and we're gonna hear you read in a bit as well. The main protagonist, the guy who becomes a famous photographer in New York City, goes back and he he has not a checker past, but he has not a good relationship with his father, who owns this butcher shop. Is it true that you were supposed to become a butcher?
I am the last in a long line of butchers. My father was a butcher, his
Wow.
father, father's father. We had a butcher shop on the main street of Hudson, Warren Street. It's actually at 310 Warren Street, which is also where Ronan's father's butcher shop is. It is now it was converted into an antique store, as was Ronan's father's butcher shop. That was definitely one course that was set for me. Walmart came to the Hudson in '96 and put a lot of businesses out of business, including my father's, although things had been really struggling for a long time before that. So it wasn't just Walmart, but yeah, there's definitely an alternate universe where Sam's Supermarket never went out of business, and where I
Mhm.
took over the lead. I mean, even if it hadn't, as you know,
Would you
I
have been able to do this as a vegetarian?
well, I didn't become a vegetarian until Sam's Supermarket closed. My father brought me to work with him at age 12. I was working, as a butcher for years before it closed. So I became a vegetarian after it closed. As a gay man in Hudson, I was desperate to get the F out. And I probably, even if the store hadn't closed, would not have stuck around to
Mm.
run it. But there's definitely, uh, a path where that would have been open to me if I had wanted it. My father also didn't want it for me. He worked insane hours and was so stressed out by the hardship of running a small business. He did not want that for me and my sister. So he always wanted us to go to college and do that kind of thing. So I don't think that was what my dad wanted for me. He never pressured me, or if anything, the pressure was the opposite way, to get the F out. I see Shiloh's question about, did it create an urban food desert when it closed? It did, and for years, folks, and actually probably still to this day, have to take a cab or ride a car, or, drive to Walmart or to one of the big box supermarkets in the area to get their food.
But what is interesting here, and thank you, Sam, and if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Sam J. Miller, author of The Blade Between. That's his latest release. What is interesting, because I looked into Hudson and I Googled Hudson, and I would like the camera to pan around a little bit. Ruby prepared this beautiful venue here today, and outside you see these wonderful historic paintings of Hudson. It looks such an idyllic town. This is from the New York Historical Society from an exhibit called the Hudson River School. And then there are also photographs of downtown Hudson, Warren Street. It looks super neat. And I can imagine that there's little artisan bakeries there. Um, and then Hudson also has a new magazine, the Hudson Valley Style magazine. So Sam, I mean, you touched on it already. It is a double-edged sword, this whole gentrification thing, because you as a gay man now you may feel right at home in Hudson as it is now.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and that's sort of the. I wouldn't even necessarily describe it as a double-edged sword. I think that the easy, um, it's easy to point to the benefits of gentrification, right? If food deserts suddenly have restaurants and stores and supermarkets, if areas that were unsafe suddenly, become safe. But I think it's a false narrative that those things require rich people moving in. The reason
Hmm.
those problems exist in the first place is because of massive disinvestment, because of racism, because of lots of problems that caused certain neighborhoods that were considered bad to fall into economic depression or disrepair. And when wealthy people start to move in, that often fuels an influx of resources and shops and cultural activity that is great. But it shouldn't be the case that that can only exist hand in hand with massive displacement and the people who made a neighborhood great, who preserved the gorgeous buildings, who stayed and did the hard work to make it special over the course of decades of poverty and economic downturn, that those people have to leave, right? I mean, I think it's possible to create neighborhoods that work for everybody. It requires everyone to sort of be able to work together on shaping what that future
It,
looks like.
it's absolutely it's really a collective effort. Very well put. And I also want to point, if the camera could go to the back of the room, exactly like Sam said, in the back of the room, there's a little clip I found online of so-called urban renewal. And I think this is either Brooklyn or the Bronx, from Critical Past, which is a website, and you see this old house, this dilapidated house, and they're just building this huge high rise just around it. And urban renewal is a very euphemistic term. It usually means removal of undesired people, poor people, that are just not really welcome in a place that you could extract a lot more money from. And Sam also mentioned people who work on older buildings and renovations and stuff like that. In Hudson, there's some pictures here at the behind us. There's a little collage of these guys that are restoring this old historic building, and the name escapes me now. Um, Gosh, well, look around, folks. I'll find it later. Uh, Now, your activism, before we go to read, and you mentioned your activism, you worked 15 years with an organization called Picture the Homeless.
Yep.
What was your role in that?
Well, over the course of 15 years, it changed a lot. I was initially the housing organizer, which, my job was to bring homeless people together to figure out a campaign to fight for housing, to force the city to create housing. And that involved a lot of, going out, meeting people, bringing them to meetings, figuring out ways like what are the policies that could be put in place. And later I was the lead organizer and supervised other organizers. And then I was the director of communications. It was sort of, I sort of called myself the press agent of the homeless, because our organization was founded and led by homeless people, and our board was always majority homeless. And we believe that homeless people were the real experts on homelessness. By the way, I live on Broadway in Manhattan, and I am sure you're hearing riot outside. There's always a fire truck or a ambulance. So I'm sorry about that. But so yeah, we believe that homeless people were the experts and that they needed to be the ones meeting with politicians to demand solutions. They needed to be the ones who were interviewed by journalists to talk about what a problem is really like. They were the ones who can develop the solutions to fix the problems that we face. And so often my job was to get journalists to interview homeless people, to set up speaking events. If a news anchor was having a panel to discuss a recent homeless policy, it's not enough to have like the mayor and a professor of homelessness and the police commissioner, right? You need to have homeless people at the table.
And we talked about this before the show, and this is so interesting. And I'm putting up some slides here in the back. Here's a slide that Shala prepared. Picture the homeless achievements: more access to phones, the internet, social media. Homeless are now a protected class from police profiling. No longer tax incentives encouraging landlords to leave housing vacant when people need homes. That's an issue in pretty much every metropolitan area around the world. Everybody I talk to has the same story. I have a story from Munich. When we lived in California, we had stories. A friend of mine, Toronto, same thing. Proof there's enough land in New York City to house the homeless. Reversed media stereotypical message about homelessness and the homeless. And Sam, this is what I'm really interested in, what we talked about before. What are some of the strategies? I mean, first of all, the importance of reframing the issue in the media, and then how do you actually do it? And then the follow-up: does it annoy you that the professor of homelessness gets to speak and not the homeless themselves in any given media piece?
First of all, you're going to be sorry you asked, because I can go on about this forever, but I'll try to make it.
Does somebody have a timeout sign and heckle us on stage? No, go ahead.
I think the reason that it's important to reframe the narrative is that a lot of people have a narrative in their head already about who the homeless are. And I think it's often an inaccurate narrative that is advanced by the media. And usually that is something along the lines of the homeless are the wretched of the earth, the people who are either because of drug addiction, because of mental illness, because of laziness, cannot sustain themselves in housing. And this stereotype comes from the left and the right. It comes from well-intentioned as well as evil-intentioned places, right? Some people believe they're just terrible people and they deserve what they have, and others believe, oh, the poor, oppressed, helpless, homeless.
Absolutely. I would actually, as a progressive lefty, I'm sometimes more annoyed with my brethren because they have a very condescending attitude where they go like, yeah, let's help them because they're just not equipped to help themselves. To start a conversation like that is not a good way to bring solidarity into a discussion.
Exactly. And what homeless people actually are is the tier of renters who could not afford to sustain themselves in housing. And the reason that's important to change that narrative is because if people stop seeing the homeless as the wretched of the earth and start seeing themselves as one paycheck away from homelessness, or start seeing that their next door neighbors could be homeless, whatever, if we start to see that we are all oppressed by high rents, by the fact that landlords have all the political power and so on, then we can come together and say, no, what is needed isn't more jail cells. What's needed isn't necessarily just more rehab facilities. What's needed is housing that people can afford, right? There's lots of mentally ill people who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. There's lots of people with substance abuse issues who are executives, but we don't use that as an excuse to kick them off the human, to revoke their membership in the human family, right? We say, oh, well, they, because they have access to care, because they can get themselves helped, or because they're able to just, keep on whatever, then we think, oh, well, we don't use that as a way to say, oh, they're less than human.
This is something that, I'm sorry to jump in here, but in Blackfish City, you touch on it too, because one of the main protagonists in Blackfish City is more like a a futuristic post-apocalyptic thriller with the similar themes, while the Blade in Between is, in the here and now. But in Blackfish City, you have one of the main protagonists who's running sort of well, she's a gangster, but a good gangster with a good heart. She has big plans to really take it over. But I'm getting off tangents here. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to read some of this chat here. Ruby says, a nature catastrophe can wipe out your possessions in a matter of minutes, and landlords can kick you out in the middle of a pandemic. And Shyla actually asked, what has changed here, the homeless activism during COVID-19, because this is accelerating to a certain extent, and we all hear stories where the machine is taking advantage of this crisis, like any disaster capitalist would.
Yeah, I
How
don't have a good answer. I mean, I'm very disconnected from homeless activism these days. I had left Picture the Homeless in 2019 when it was in a tough place financially, and so I can say that. I mean, the other thing is that like I had been doing it for so long, and I was feeling real frustration and burnout with the difficulty of trying to make big picture change. So I think that. Like people mentioned in the chat, landlords are kicking people out. Homelessness is increasing. This is a moment where if the media stopped with this narrative that homeless people are the helpless, then we could be seeing real solidarity and people coming together. And so that's sort of that's the story that I try to tell in my books, is that we all have a lot in common, and we can achieve a lot by coming together. And usually the people who are profiting from whatever our high rents, our lack of health care, our lack of workplace protections, are the ones who stand to lose from us coming together.
Right. The solidarity and seeing through the divide and conquer strategy. Shiloh here says in the chat, not sure if Habitat for Humanity can break the cycle of homelessness. In the Philippines, there was a movement called Kalinga, a kind of sweat equity where people who are homeless come together to build each other's house. That sounds very cool.
Yeah, I think that kind of model has huge potential. I think that what limits it is the fact that it is very small scale, right? Governments need to really invest in that. Like New York City spends literally $1 billion a year on providing shelter to homeless people, and shelter is often 3 times as expensive as rent would be.
Right.
So if governments really got behind that kind of solution and really adopted it on a large scale and intervened in the housing market so that landlords weren't the ones calling all the shots, then we might see some real solutions to the housing crisis.
Now, let's move on to some reading. And through the magic of Second Life, I have this book stand just came out of the ground. And if I could ask you, Sam, to please stand up, your avatars to stand up and go towards this book stand and read from The Blade Between. And our camera operator, can I ask you to cam out above the venue? And we did not mention this earlier. We actually have a whale that is floating around in the sky. And I thought of this when I started reading the book, and it's like, okay, this is about whales. There is a whale in Second Life. Somebody makes a whale that is floating in the sky. We got to get that one. And then we got that one. And then I finished the book and I go like, wow, the protagonists are in fact, envisioning floating magnificent whales in the sky. So this book is, as we mentioned before, set in your hometown of Houston, upstate New York, and that town was built on the money coming from whaling and butchering those whales. I threw up another slide here in the back. And by the way, these are paintings of you, Sam. Is that right?
I'm not going to go ahead and not turn around because I'll probably fall off the stage. Actually,
exactly. That's what we want. Comic relief.
Let's try this.
You could do this.
Oh yeah, yes. That's an illustration that I made, a digital illustration.
Yeah. And this quote here, there's a lesson in history to learn from the whaling industry, the idea that this beautiful, amazing, intelligent creature was a resource to be plundered for centuries, and that the only reason it stopped was not because we cared about whales, but because petroleum and other energy sources ended up becoming cheaper. So this is really also the basis for these emotions. They manifest themselves. It's almost like the trauma, the blood is influencing your protagonists here in this town, because the town was built on this blood. But what are you going to read for us from the blade between? Please set up the
Well, I'm
scene.
going to read the opening chapter, and I'll start with the quote from James Baldwin. I have two excerpts to read, so do you want me to take a break between them, or should
Oh
I
yeah,
go
please.
from
Yeah,
one to
yeah.
the second? All right. So the first one is the first chapter, and I'll just jump right in. But it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. James Baldwin. Chapter 1. Welcome to Hudson, a whale of a town. Bright, raw wintertime, and Warren Street is a swath of white and red. Blood-soaked men drag strips of whale flesh through the snow. Black smoke billows from man-sized iron tripods. Bones reach for the sky like irrational red fences, rib cages recently flensed. Hooks and knives and blades as long as swords slice and hack the air, a whole weird lexicon of specialized instruments. Mincing spade, monkey belt, fire pike, throat chain, fin toggle. The strips are sliced down into blocks. The blocks are fed to the bubbling pots. The whole city smells like blood and wood smoke and the thick, meaty mammalian stink of melting blubber, marine and vaguely reminiscent of alcohol. Blubber and skin and spermaceti are the engine of industry, the bloody gold that has powered Hudson's rise to power, boiled down and barreled and shipped off to light lanterns as far away as London. The baleen will become women's corsets, and the bones will be returned to the river, and the teeth will be scrimshawed and sent home to sweethearts, sold to collectors. But what will be done with the rest of these magnificent monsters? The livers as big as cows, the eyes the size of a human head, intestines so long they could be stretched off to mark the extent of any one of Hudson's uphill streets. Brains bigger than any humans, and wiser too with the things they've seen, at depths that would crush a man like a baby chick in a fist. Sunken empires, sea monsters believed to be mere myth, the skeletons of 1,000,000 drowned men and women. What will happen to the rest of the whale? Some will be fed to dogs and pigs. Some will be cooked and eaten by humans. Most will be buried. Long trenches along the waterfront at first, then creeping up the streets as space runs out. The hearts and brains of whales will feed Hudson's soil. Their blood ascends to the sky in oak tree branches, feeds its people in apples and corn, seeps into the stone and cement of the foundations of its homes. The sky darkens. The day's work is done. Men drink cheap cider. Tomorrow, maybe, more whale carcasses will come. The harbor stretches around into North Bay. You can count a couple dozen tall ship masts. In 20 years, the railroad will arrive, heading north from New York City, bound for Albany, for Canada, its path perfectly plotted to cut off Hudson's North Bay, cripple the city's shipping trade, start its slow decline into irrelevance. 40 years after that, Hudson will have become the East Coast's largest center for prostitution. The Diamond Street whorehouse is so notorious that they'll have to change the name of the street after the governor personally sends a swarm of state troopers to bust up the brothels. Bootleggers will base their operations out of Hudson. So will crystal meth manufacturers many years later. Movies will shoot here, ones that want somewhere that still looks like the Great Depression, ones where Jack Nicholson is an alcoholic or Harry Belafonte is a broken-down gambler. Hudson has been many cities, but it has always been this one, the one with soil steeped in blood, with a harbor full of bones.
And that's Sam J. Miller reading from The Blade Between. And Ava says here in the local chat, that line that inspired her outfit 40 years after the Hudson will have become the East Coast's largest center of prostitution. Ava is dressed like a prostitute, she says. So wonderful reading, Sam.
Thank you, thank
Wonderful.
you, thank you.
And now you're all your I mean, this character is specifically is also a photographer. He's also gay, and Shyla put up this slide here by Poppy Seabright. There is a quote by Poppy Seabright, and I don't know who that is, and I want you to introduce him to us. But Poppy Seabright was asked, "Why do you write about gay characters?" And his answer was, "Why doesn't anybody ever ask heterosexual writers why they write about straight characters?" Who is Poppy Seabright, and what is his influence on you? And how about all these gay characters, Sam?
Well, you all should know Poppy Z. Bright. Amazing, amazing horror writer. His book Drawing Blood is one of my all-time favorite, if possibly my favorite horror novel ever. It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful love story. It's a bloody, gnarly, gory mess, and it's hot as hell. It's scary as hell. So, I think that the history of horror is actually really gay, and there's a lot of queer icons of horror, and I think it's an experience that's pretty common among queer horror fans that I've talked to, is that often when you're a young queer person, you don't identify with the dashing hero, and you don't identify with the damsel in distress. You identify with the monster. Frankenstein's monster is a super queer figure. And I think that often, things like Ursula the Sea Witch in The Little Mermaid was styled to look like Divine, the actor. So I think that those are the places where we've been, because of homophobia, because of patriarchy, things that are queer have often been coded as monstrous. And so that's where our representation was for years and years. So, I don't just write about gay characters, but I really like writing about gay characters, and I think that that those are stories that need to be told, and that like that Poppy Z. Bright quote says, we take it for granted. We take the straight default for granted, and so
Absolutely.
if only to challenge that and get folks to think seriously about who our heroes are and whose stories are worth telling. I think that's a big part of my work and my activism, for want of a better word, right? It's all about changing conversations and broadening the parameters of the possible. So, whether that's, getting folks to feel optimistic about their power to engage in and fight gentrification, or save the planet from climate change, or end patriarchy. Those are the things that I get excited about telling.
And I want to say, for me, as a boring white heterosexual 50-year-old man, I find these books also super awesome because they provide me insight into other worlds. I mean, I think that's also what books in general um, should. I mean, at least for me, they should be discoveries into other worlds. I find nothing more boring than to cement, perpetuate my own sort of viewpoint. But as you know, Sam, there's a lot of people out there who want nothing but that, just have their viewpoint reinforced nonstop. So that's not our core audience, I suppose.
No, but sometimes they stumble in by accident and don't leave. The door is open. Anybody who wants to, and
It's
I
like you're
think,
sneaking some steamed broccoli into a bad burger.
yeah,
Nutrition.
or advancing that notorious homosexual agenda you've heard so much about, of trying to corrupt people to the dark side.
Oh boy, we have that on tape now, Sam. Okay, so we are progressing through a wonderful show. Time is always running when you're having fun. Um, Now we have one more excerpt from The Blade Between, and this is later on in the story. Please set up the story here. There's a bunch of other characters. Ronan, the hero, or the main character, goes back to Hudson, and his friend Dom works. Is a African American policeman, and his wife Atella. They play important roles. But please do set it up. Where are we in the story?
Sure. So I'm going to read from chapter 18. I'm going to sort of chop it up a little bit for standalone purposes, but it is the scene when the narrator Ronan has just realized that this person who this young gay trans man who he had befriended and is a model that he was photographing is actually dead and has been dead for a while, so that he's a ghost that he's been interacting with.
And that's the person who he follows to Hudson, right? Because he had no intention of going back to his hometown, and this young guy who he photographed said, you got to meet me there, and then he takes the train, and then
It's
he realized,
unclear. It's unclear whether that's
oh,
why he got on the train. It says he has a note in his calendar that he had a photo shoot, but it didn't say where. So that's how he pieces it together. But he's not sure. Ronan has some addiction issues that cause him to not be the most reliable narrator of his own life. So yeah, this is the moment where he's sort of confronted with the reality of the supernatural and gets a sort of like Cliff Notes version of what the supernatural vibe of Hudson is. Cold morning, the smell of the sea in the air. I walked all the way home, my head on fire from what I just learned. And because fire wants nothing but to make more fire, I stole a cigarette from my father and went out onto the porch to smoke it. One of two things was true. Either I was completely crazy or ghosts were real and one was haunting me. Actually, both things could be true. But was this such new knowledge? Hadn't I felt it from the second I stepped off the train? Hadn't I known it in my heart, in my gut, the whole time I was living here? Something was wrong with Hudson, always had been. The city was submerged in something, caught up in a spiritual membrane that rendered the normal pools of life and death inapplicable. I had a choice. I wasn't helpless. I could choose to believe I was crazy and try to get help accordingly. Head back to Manhattan, check into rehab, abandon my dad again and Atala and all our schemes, and Dom. Or I could proceed like ghosts were real. Sometimes accepting the impossible is as easy as preferring it to the alternative. I called out catch, but no one answered me. I went inside and put 2 hoodies on and walked down Warren Street to the train tracks that split the city along 6th Street, past grinning campaign volunteers, and took a left to follow the rails south. My head still spun. My stomach was sick, but leaving the street behind and walking into the woods felt forbidden, delicious. I'd always imagined cops or wicked brakemen would descend upon me the instant I left behind the safety of the city's street grid, but that was absurd. No one could see me. No one cared what I did. A culvert ran alongside the rails, dead blonde cattails, a tricycle, standing water. On my left, a sprawl of low yellow buildings surrounded by fences 3 stories high, capped with coils of razor wire. Hudson Correctional Facility. Ella Fitzgerald was incarcerated in Hudson, said Catch, who was squatting on the rails on my right. Shit, I said, startled. Sorry, Catch said. I lose track of where and when I am sometimes. Hudson exists outside of time and space as you understand them. Shit gets confusing. Anyway, she was 15. It was 1933. The House of Refuge for Women in Hudson was only the second gender-specific prison in American history. Hey, Catch, I said. Hey, Ronan. He got up and walked beside me. His posture was better, his face brighter, skin almost glowing. Hair sculpted, coiffed, spiky sea urchin couture. Are you really him? I think so, he said, and looked down at his hands. How? They brought me back, he said, so I could bring you back, and we could save the town together. We came around a bend, walking west now. We could see the river glimmer. They who? It's probably easier if I show you. He put his hand on my shoulder. Wind hit me, sharp and cold, making me wince, making me blink. And we were on a ship, standing in the crow's nest, looking down on slaughter. A whale thrashed. Tiny men shouted, screamed, brandished blades, swung ropes. Bright red foam churned. The sun was setting, and it was bitter cold, and we were thousands of miles and hundreds of years from home, and something magnificent was being murdered. Catch took hold of my hand with his, and I was grateful for that human touch. Take me away, I whispered. Please, take me anywhere. Just... Wind again, blistering, scorching my exposed skin until I had to cover my face with my hands to keep it from cracking open. When it died down and I dared to look, we were home. Except not. Hudson, the waterfront, ages ago, long, wide wooden docks, no street lights. A whale lashed to the side of a ship, dead at least. That was something. Its suffering had stopped. That, Catch said, pointing to the great mammal's corpse, that's who they are. Again, his hand on my shoulder, again the icy blast. This time I was ready for it, tried to keep my eyes open. But the wind kept up and my eyes watered and the world blurred, and when I blinked to clear, we were standing atop Cemetery Hill. Full night, cloudless sky, so many stars, because of course there were, because electricity hadn't been invented yet. The only light that humans could make in the dark was with candle or torch or bonfire, none of which could dent the light of the stars. As if in response to my thoughts, stars darkened overhead. A huge patch of the sky went black. The patch moved. Something was flying, swimming between me and the stars. Is that? That's us, Catch said, and it came closer, and I could see its shape clearly. Long, streamlined, massive tail propelling it. A whale bigger than all the whales that ever were. My heart sang in my chest. My lungs filled up with helium.
And that's Sam J. Miller reading from The Blade Between, and that's the whale that we have right here on top of this building. And thank you, Sam. Wonderful reading. And here you can folks can get a little taste of the magic that you're weaving in here. And I'm not going to spoil the ending. The ending is beautiful. It's magical. And so this combination with this sort of nuts and bolts reality on the ground of gentrification and these sort of real threats and and the history and all this kind of stuff that exists sort of in parallel in these magical realms and influences what people do is yeah it's really well done. Shala Super Gecko asks here, why was Ella Fitzgerald in Hudson? What was the charge? And let me remind folks that if they want to look around later here in this venue, there's a whole bunch of um, photos around here, especially behind us. I think there is one photo of this correctional facility where Ella Fitzgerald was. But yeah, that's interesting. I had no idea. Do you know what that was?
Yeah, the Hudson Correctional Facility, then the House of Refuge for Women, was a place where a lot of women went. A lot of young women, girls, were sent by their families. Sometimes they got into trouble with,
Difficult women.
yeah,
That
yeah,
didn't want to
whatever.
stand behind the stove and cook, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Whatever that meant. So many were sent and often couldn't leave. But yeah, it's there's. I'm trying to find it on Instagram. It's there somewhere, and if I find it later, I'll share it. There's a very cool historical project that shares letters from and to young women who were imprisoned or who lived there.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's
Oh,
pretty
we'll
good
incorporate it into
documentation.
this venue. Oh, this is wonderful. We'll put it here into this venue. This is something that uh, I love when discovering books where it's sort of woven into the history of the town. Sam, and when I didn't have a lot of time to look it up, but
Yeah,
that's
I just found it. I'll put it in the chat. It's called Prison Public Memory.
that's one of the wonderful things about fiction that is situated in a historical context. We're 10 minutes to closing time for the stream. I begged my producers to go a little over time, and they complied because this is just too good. Sam, if I could ask you to actually you could just remain standing because I understand you have one more reading prepared for us uh, from Blackfish City, which I finished. I spent I didn't waste the whole day. I decided to dedicate the entire day plowing through this awesome book, which is very different in setting and style, but is has very similar themes as we discussed. What is Blackfish City for you? What it is for me is it depicts the libertarian dream city, which is run by algorithms um and sort of the stock market and not those dirty governments. What is Blackfish City for you?
Blackfish City is a futuristic floating city in the Arctic after climate change has transformed the globe. And it's a laboratory for me to play with all of my favorite urban planning fantasies and dreams. And so it's, as an organizer, you want things to be different, and you sort of sometimes understand the historical reasons why they're not. And so imagining a city that in some ways would work better than real cities, right? It's perfectly possible to have a city that doesn't depend upon a brutal, militarized, racist police force the way most American cities do. But then in other ways might be worse. There might be greater exploitation of housing and the poor. So it's a playground for me to play with all my weird policy ideas. And also orcas and polar bears.
Exactly. There is a polar bear here. There's a polar bear here on stage. I would like the camera to focus on this polar bear, because again, this is also the theme that reoccurs here, is this bonding with animals, and it's incredibly important in this book, the bonding with animals, and being grounded in nature, right? What is that with the ground with the animals? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I'm obsessed with animals. I love them. I think they're amazing. And I think that for me, there's a really powerful metaphor in humans' relationships with animals for humans' relationship with nature and the planet in general. And that we, as humans, it is a fiction to believe that we are separate from the natural world. And it is a lie that we have supremacy over it and that we have the right to destroy it, and we depend upon it in all the same ways that any other animal does. And so in just discussing relationships between humans and animals, I can sort of visualize or discuss in greater detail that concept of we are nature, we're not separate from it, we need to exist with it, and when we do, we can figure out a way forward that doesn't destroy the planet, because when we do that, we are destroying ourselves.
Kovari Matavan is in the audience, a wonderful author. Kovari Matavan says, "I love you just for that." Apparently, very good. There's a lot of love in the room. Angelina says, "I will tell you afterwards." Angelina, I don't know what that refers to. Maybe that was a private IM. Before you read, and I understand Sam is reading a scene that was cut from the book. There is an epigraph in the beginning of the book, and it's on the slide here right now in the back here. And this is also a piece of art of the city that you're depicting. Now, this world building in Blackfish City is just amazing. And the city that you're depicting here has these arms, and it's after the climate catastrophe. All the big metropolitan centers are destroyed. And here are these private cities that are designed in different ways. And this one here has enormous poverty and enormous wealth, just like every other city. This epigraph is by Samuel Delany. And this is amazing because I read Samuel Delany's Dahlgren, and that was just, everybody should read that. That's an aside. But it's amazing. And here this epigraph says, "There is nothing safe about the darkness of this city and its stink. Well, I have abrogated all claim to safety coming here. It is better to discuss it as though I had chosen. That keeps the scrim of sanity before the awful set. What will lift it?" Samuel Delany Dahlgren. Dahlgren is about a city, about a character called Kid and his relationship with the city. Very, very fitting that you lead into your Blackfish City with this quote. So go ahead, Sam. Read to us the city. And does it say in the back of the book, "The city is war" or "cities are war"?
Every city is a war.
Every city is a war.
Is a quote in the book that I think
what
is
does
used
that
in the
mean?
check copy. That's always a conflict of competing interests, and that the landlords whose interests are diametrically opposed to the tenants, the employers whose interests are diametrically opposed to their employees, the people from diverse backgrounds who often bring with them or find upon arrival conflict based on different who people are. That a city is a fragile piece that's been brokered between all sorts of people who, in many ways, it's both, right? It's a utopia and a dystopia. In many ways, it's this incredible model of harmony where many different people can live together in mostly peace and with a shockingly small amount of violence when you compare it against the size of a population, but also where people are struggling and people are fighting to survive, and often the way they survive depends upon screwing over somebody else or involves them being screwed over. So yeah, that's what I meant by every city is a war. So I'll read this chapter. It was deleted from Blackfish City. It's actually narrated by the orca. It was deleted just because there's a lot of POV perspectives in Blackfish City, and we felt like one more just made it officially too much. So here we go. If
a woman rides in on the orca, we got to put that in there, right?
Yes, that's how the action. That's how the action commences. Is this woman arrives in town with an orca and a polar bear on a mission of it might be beautiful and might be bloody or both, and she only gets one chapter that she narrates. That's at the exact middle of the book, but she sort of sets the plot in motion. And her orca also got one chapter, but it got cut, and now I will share it with you. Most peopled places turn the sea sour, foul, toxic. You can smell them from a day's swim away, the filth they put in the water, the stink of their suffering. This place is not so bad. They have huge machines for processing their waste. The cold keeps them out of the sea. A giant metal cone warms the deep water. We've been to 73 peopled places, and I think I like this one best, which isn't to say I actually like it. She thinks this will be the last. I hope she is right. I hope we can do what we came here to do and then go back to some place unpeopled. In peopled places, she has to keep the bear chained up, keep him out of water. This makes him angry, uncontrollable. He is my only friend, but I am afraid for her when they are up on the surface, where I cannot help her if something goes wrong. Their eyes find me no matter how deep I dive. Tiny machines that see in the dark, connected to people up above. They summon other machines who watch me too, follow me wherever I go. These machines don't try to hurt me, at least. That hasn't been true wherever we've gone. People watch her too, up above. I feel their eyes on her. When we returned home all those years ago and found our people slaughtered, she wept for a full day. I wailed with her for my own murdered kin and for hers. Each of us amplified the other's pain, echoed it back and forth, until I thought it would split us in two. Only hunger saved us. Hunger stirred my savagery, which roused her own, which stopped our wailing. She brought me armfuls of bloody snow, hacked off pieces, shreds of clothing. I could tell them apart, our people and the people who hurt them. I smelled their bodies, their sweat, their hair, their waste, their stories. From their smells, I could see their shape, their weight, whether they were young or old or weak or strong. 40 people total. I could see their outlines, so could she. And so we moved on, looking for our lost, the ones whose bodies we did not find, who we knew escaped, and looking for those 40 outlines. We found many of them, in the cities of the land and the cities of the sea. Sooner or later, if they were there to be found, I would catch their scent. She broke them apart or she pushed them into the sea for me to tear to slow, tiny pieces. Some we learned things from, the names and locations of their comrades. Others had nothing to offer, but their fate was the same. I yearn for the open sea, the unpeopled places, and so does she. There are none of my kind swimming in the sea surrounding this peopled place. Not here, not anywhere close. They have abandoned these waters. They were hunted here, cleared out for food, our babies taken, and the warnings still hang in the water like oil. I'm not sad about it anymore when we arrive in some new place and I am still alone. She feels the same thing. Lonely is not like sad. When we mirror each other's loneliness, it grows smaller, not larger.
And that's the cutscene from the perspective of the orca. That's really beautiful. I mean, this is powerful. This must have been hard to cut this. I guess you had discussions with your editor. I mean, they always say you have to kill your babies for the bigger picture, right? I mean, this is pretty powerful.
Thank you, thank you. Well, if you've the eagle-eyed might notice that some of that language does, and the plot details that are there do get recycled into the text. So it wasn't all
Yep.
gone. And I think that this is where having a great editor is really priceless, because they can tell you what babies to kill. You could kill all the babies, right? But that doesn't mean they're the right babies,
You
and
got to kill the right
then you've
babies,
then you've
exactly.
made a horrible mistake. So yeah, my editor for Blackfish City is Zach Wagman. He was also my editor on The Blade Between, and he's a real genius for plot and flow. And so yeah, it was a tough call, but I think the right call. And thanks to the magic of the internet and Second Life, it's not gone forever.
No, now it's actually exactly now it's on YouTube, and we're talking about killing babies, and the YouTube algorithm is right now texting whoever's in charge, taking us down and calling the cops on us.
I can explain, I swear.
They're transcribing it in real time. Sam, if you could sit back down again, thank you so much for reading.
Thank you.
We can go
Well, I
about 10.
don't know if I can sit back down.
You can do
We
this.
shall see.
We had Larry Niven on here, and it was awesome. He was talking with Second Life founder Philip Rosedale. Larry Niven was, and he said live on the air, he said, "I can't see him." Click the couch again. Click it one more time, and then you're sitting correctly. Click the couch and choose one of the sits, like we did before. And the funny thing was, Larry Niven couldn't see Philip, and then I just took his whole couch with Larry Niven on it and pushed him towards Philip. He goes, "Oh, there he is." That was the best, one of the best moments.
I mean,
Now,
if Larry Niven can figure Second Life out, I'd like to think that I could too.
it was quite amazing. In my forthcoming book, the Second Life Book Club, I'm getting too old for this SHIT. That's the subtitle, which it's going to come out
Awesome.
by Simon and Schuster, written by me in a couple of years. I'm dreaming. Um, the Larry Niven story is also amazing because he had tremendous problems downloading and installing Second Life, and as soon as he was in, he was able to navigate easily. And the reason was he was very familiar with envisioning a three-dimensional space, and he had problems with the Windows operating system. And the problem was not the
Amazing.
three-dimensional space, right? Because I
Amazing.
mean, a desktop is cluttered. I mean, it's everything is on top, and he was, "Where is it? Where is it?" I said, "Larry, it's probably underneath." "I know, but how do I get to it?" And once he was in the three-dimensional space, he was just like, "Oh, here, I turned to my left, I turned to my right, oh, here," and so on and so forth. But I digress. I want to touch on your first book, and the camera could zoom in. It's right here on the ground, actually. I read this one electronically. I don't usually do that. The Art of Starving, your debut novel. I read it on the Pocketbook. Pocketbook is not sponsoring us, but it's really an awesome device, I have to say. It's right here on the stage in front of the table. And The Art of Starving is ostensibly a young adult novel. And what really struck me is a bunch of things that, like I said earlier, I was like, God, this main character, he has to become a vegetarian, and he did, and that's awesome and super rewarding. Um, but you mentioned this very often. The character here is says, and he's told this, that food is love. I mean, this is what every one of us experiences. Food is love. Love is expressed through food with our relatives or with our spouses and in other circumstances, and that can be extremely difficult for people uh, with eating disorders. The main character here is anorexic, and I understand you had those same challenges as a youth. So how did you deal with this constant, well-meaning mantra of food is love?
Um, I don't know. My eating disorder when I was a teenager really stemmed from, um, things like bullying and homophobia and the sort of idea of what man should look like or be like, and sort of feeling deeply discontented with my appearance and my inability to perform masculinity with any kind of satisfaction. So it goes back to what we discussed earlier about hate and rage, and how when you don't have any power, hate and rage can be vital sources of power and
Right.
can fuel you. And so they were fueling me. And
So it's not so much that you were sort of thinking like this whole food is love, like that's like very very oppressive to me. It really is that it was that you needed to felt the need to adhere to a certain ideal, and that was sort of contrary to, and you thought you could achieve it by not eating.
yeah, and that
Mhm.
that was when you have no power. Often the only power you have is over yourself, and so the only violence you can inflict is on yourself. And so that's what that really was like, attempting to feel like I was in control, but by restricting what I ate, that is just like Matt in the Art of Starving. The way that I overcame my eating disorder was literally by becoming a vegetarian, and that was how I figured out a way to eat that was healthy, that spoke to my overall sort of political beliefs, and helped me sort of transition right around the time that I was coming out to a sort of way of finding power in things other than hate and violence.
There's an art piece here in the back by Taylor Harbison that Shyla put together in a slide where you are here. This is a painting by Taylor Harbison of you as a very thin young man.
Yeah, he painted that. He's an amazing artist. He passed away in 2006, but I was his assistant and he was my mentor. I was in a high school program for at-risk teens that paired us with mentors, and it was just my luck to get mentored by him. And so he was the first person I ever came out to, the first person who sort of taught me how awesome it is to be gay. And so, yeah, he painted that right around the time that I was figuring out a way out of my eating disorder. So yeah, that's a pretty skinny kid right there.
Mhm. Shala's asking a question earlier that I don't want to miss. Do you feel your writing is an extension of your activism?
Yeah, I absolutely do, and I feel like storytelling is a really important and often overlooked part of activism. Right? It's easy to get caught up in the nuts and bolts of calling your senators and sending letters to elected officials and having neighborhood meetings to address an issue, and those are all super important. But the big picture work is important too, and that involves changing the conversation to address, to get people to think differently about a problem. And so
But
if
this
I
is
can,
so interesting because I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a certain contingency of people that I know, and they're very very smart people, and they do a lot of great work. But they would argue that reading fiction or writing fiction and reading is a waste of time. It takes away from the activism. I mean, I couldn't disagree more. But how would you respond to that? You're like, yeah, I don't have time to read like stories that are not real, made
I,
up stuff.
I respect that. I know people like that, and I say whatever works for you, whatever keeps you in the fight. That's super valid, and I don't knock people's reading habits. So, as I said earlier, for me, it's been a crucial part of my activism. To be able to escape from the difficulty of community organizing by engaging in entertainment and reading for fun, and reading about things that aren't the horrific oppression that I see every day, and also that it is a facet of my work, and that if you are already convinced that homeless people are people and that we should figure out a way forward from the housing crisis, then that's great, but that's not everybody, and so some people um, uh, still don't feel that way, and so I want to try to tell stories that can help broaden who's at the table and who's fighting for justice.
Mhm. And I would add that that fiction and stories can transport a deeper truth. It's not an either or question. They're very incredibly well written investigative pieces and deep, wonderful books. But fiction and stories and characters can transport this truth in a different way and possibly deeper. I would encourage everyone to pick up any any of Sam's books, but if you know a young person, give them the gift of the art of starving. It's really wonderful. This is one of my top lists. If I find if somebody comes across in that young demographic, this is a perfect gift for whatever it is, Christmas
Thank you.
or birthday. Sam, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time. I know if folks have
Awesome.
questions, I am on Twitter way too much. So I am at Sentence Bender on Twitter. If folks want to hit me up with any questions I didn't get to answer, I'm always around. Instagram at sam.j.miller. Yeah, always happy to chat.
You should be here, and we're going to concerts by Instagram, Twitter. That's so 2000, whatever it is, 19. um, but you're obviously, I say this to everyone. You're welcome back, and please spread the. If you had a good time, spread the word. If you didn't have a good time, just don't talk about it. Uh,
I had a
Deny
great
that you
time.
ever.
I'm grateful to everybody for tuning in, listening to me drone on and on about the housing crisis and shit like that.
It's super important. I mean, especially now. I mean, we are in a crisis point, and we can learn a lot through the pandemic. There's a lot we can learn and a lot we can imagine to make it better. Um, Usually, I do ask what are you reading? Please put it in the chat, and also the audience. We did that before the show too. We're collecting that, and we're putting in a repository. This is, of course, the brand new island here, island number two, that you're here. And I don't want to jinx it, but I do hope maybe I can will it into being that we're going to get island number three and number four. I'm pretty sure we can. And let's do the outro. Thanks. The Second Life Book Club main show is every Wednesday, 12 o'clock. And recommendations, suggestions for guests, go to slbookclub@draxtor.com. I got a lot of really good emails with great suggestions. The flagship show is Wednesday. We also have once a month, we have the Mystery Hour with Con Sweeney, which is on Monday. And also starting in June, there's going to be a nonfiction show with social scientists, with historians, with journalists. And the kickoff is with Cory Doctorow talking to David Dayen from the American Prospect. That's on June 4th. That's going to kick off that series. It's going to be a monthly series. I don't know how fast I'm going to burn out with reading, but I'll try my best. The show is produced by Strawberry Linden, Shyla the Super Gecko, and myself. Location manager and master builder is Ruby Geek. Ruby did a fabulous job. The avatars are customized by Kralos, and sometimes they're built from scratch by Silas Merlin. Special thanks to Marian McCann, AJ McDowell, Arden Schwartzman, Brett Linden, Theanine, and Patch Linden, and also big thanks to Bad Unicorn. Bad Unicorn provided all the building elements for this particular venue. It's a guy from originally from the UK who is in Toronto. Amazing designer here in Second Life, Bad Unicorn. Check him out. Also, big thanks to all the moles over at Linden Lab, especially Ancient Mole, who is an awesome dude. And yes, please find the links to the calendar, Discord, Flickr on the sandwich boards. To recommend authors, I already said that, slbookclub@draxtor.com, or you can IM the avatar Jarrett bot. That's Jarrett the bot from Simon Stevenson's book. Now, lastly, please tip our volunteer staff. There is a tip jar that looks like a dragon made of some sort of stone, reading a book. It's an homage to yours truly by by Silas Merlin, and she or it functions as a tip jar. So go put your Linden shekels in there if you have some loose Linden shekels in your trousers. Next week, we have Nino Kipri. Nino Kipri has a new book out called Defect or Defect. I pronounce it the German way. Nino Kipri, next Wednesday, 12 o'clock, right here on the Second Life Book Club.
Thanks, everybody.